It's great to be here today, and I sit here. I'm not really alone. I have all my teachers are here. I'm a very close friend of Thomas Keating. We've been in dialogue for 25 years at the Snowmass Monastery with people from all over the world, different religions. And we wrote a book together called The Common Heart. And so that's been a very fruitful endeavor for us. And my basic idea of teaching, I have 6 learning groups at Denver here, and they've been going for over 30 years, of people who are committed to weekly learning and sometimes 2 or 3 times a week learning, and some everyday learning. So that's my idea of, that was my way of recovering from my education. I went to Dartmouth College and studied religious studies there, which at the time seemed totally impractical. And but there was we have an idea that as you get older, you can become more like a child and regain your love of learning that gets kind of institutionalized out of you. So the basic format and what we found out at the dialogue is that as Jews, we really put a high mark on questions. The questions are better than the answers. In fact, one thing we'll discuss here is the names for God, and we don't have a name for God, so we don't use the word God. We use, sometimes I'll use the word Hashem, which means the name of the one who cannot be named. And there's only one name in the Torah. We don't call it the Old Testament, probably most of you know that, but it's a somewhat political deal there, which we'll talk about because we're going to talk about the first century, which is very exciting to me because I spent a lot of my time in the first century, which illustrates the second point. On Thursday night, we're going to cross the Red Sea, and that hopefully that sounds ridiculous to you. You know, I mean, we actually go down every year at midnight to the Cherry Creek because the crossing of the sea happened at midnight, and we actually walk across the Cherry Creek, but unfortunately there's a huge amount of water there, so you might read the headline the next morning, you know, Orthodox Jews drowned in Cherry Creek, you know. But we actually cross it, and we don't remember it, we actually relive it. And I didn't know what that meant, actually, until up in Marble, Colorado, I met a Navajo Indian shaman who told me that every year they have a ceremony where they relive their origins coming out of the barrancas of canyons in Mexico. I said, no, you remember it, don't you? He says, no, we relive it. And I said, well, what does that mean? He says, well, time is circular for us. And then it dawned on me that time is circular for the Jewish people too. So we, at our Seder, which I'll talk a lot about, it wasn't the last Seder or the Last Supper, but it was the Last Supper. As most of you probably know, it was the Seder that Jesus attended. And it's always kind of moving to see the different paintings of it and so forth. But so Jesus and I share a common education in the Talmud. And so hopefully we could talk about, and I hope it, if somebody can raise their hand every time I sound sacrilegious, so I don't get into too much trouble. But my friend John here is my bodyguard, just in case. And he's Catholic, so some of my best friends are Catholic. And I think we have a lot of gallows humor, so I hope you appreciate it, because there were a lot of gallows, and we'll go over some of this history, and some of it isn't so good, but it's a big part of the Seder, because for 2,000 years, most of the Seders were done with the windows and the doors boarded up. Does anybody here know why? I'd like to ask you questions too, but I love to put people on the spot. So if anybody knows why the windows and doors were boarded up, does anybody have an idea? Well, that's a sanguine interpretation, yeah. It was to keep out the angel of death, but it was immediate. I mean, what happens during Passover? What lines up with Passover every year? You guys know that. Huh? Easter. So they would do the Passion Play, and then there was trouble. Because, and I'm going to say these things because it's just part of the reality of history. And, I hope you object, or you can argue with me anytime, because that's what we like. As you should see, how many people read the attachment? Oh, great, you did your homework, unbelievable. Rabbi Booth, how are you? Welcome. Did you read the attachment? No. What? Oh, anyway. Anyway, though, many times they would do the Passion Play, and then that would be it. There would be a pogrom afterwards, and so the Seder was a very risky time, also because of the blood libel. There's the great book by Bernard Malmund called The Fixer about that, and that was one of the last lynchings in America, in Atlanta. There was a blood libel in 1920, and Leo Frank was lynched by a mob there. And so it's Egyptian TV recently ran a 100 session series on the blood libel as a reality. So it's not ancient history, it's still around. And it ties in this strange way. So I look at this is the first year I ever looked at it as a positive thing, because the blood is the key part of the Seder, because we put those. I know everybody here has read the Bible, right? And in Exodus, of course, they put the blood on the doorpost. But what they didn't tell you there is the blood was a mixture of the blood of circumcision and the blood of the Paschal lamb. So we have 3 bloods, and you'll get a handout on that in a minute, hopefully, maybe. And these 3 bloods are still controversial, because we have a constant legal fight. I went to a circumcision recently in Boulder, and I thought I was going to be shot, because some people called that baby torture, and but it all seems like really crazy to me, because we're very careful with the kosher slaughtering has been outlawed in Sweden and Denmark and a few other places. So somehow we're still always fighting this battle about this blood stuff. But we are really careful not to drink blood, So we roasted the sheep for the Seder because the blood drips out. And we have to salt our meat and very carefully extract the blood because the blood is the life force, and the Holy Temple at Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, which we're going to talk a lot about because it's just incredible there. You stand, I was there in the 6-Day War, and I was there the first day that you could stand right there between the Holy Sepulchre and the Temple Mount and the Wailing Wall, and it was an incredible experience. That was the first day in 2,000 years that a Jew could stand there without fear, and I was there, and I heard the shofar blow, and that was a moment that changed my life. But it's such a conundrum that these three religions that are within 500 feet of each other, right there on the Temple Mount, have had so much connection and so much violence, so much attempts to just annihilate each other as we're doing right now. And what did God have in mind here? How could the three religions that are really based on the Bible or the Torah, how could that be? So dialogue is especially important to me because I always feel, Father Abraham giving us a little smile because most of the time he's crying over all the incredible amounts of blood that have been spilled right there on the Temple Mount. But on the Temple Mount, the focal point of the service was everybody would bring a sheep around on their shoulders into the temple, and then the person would slaughter it, which is called shecht or shchita. We'll talk a little more about it. And then the blood, the priest, the Kohen, would take the blood and throw it against the altar, and that was the atonement or the at-one-ment part of the service. And so the blood was really an important part. That it was the first arterial blood, because the blood is called Adam hu hachayim. The blood is the life force. And that's the focal point of coming close to God, is feeling that life force in our food, in ourselves, and honoring that life force. And so that's we'll do a little more talking about that, but I'll occasionally take a breath and feel free to ask a question. I'll often use a Hebrew word you might not understand, or a context you might not understand, and like I say, the questions are much better than the answers. So we're really trying to, push 1040 in there into the synapses, get everybody's mind working. That's our approach. And it's the good, the bad, the ugly, like I say about the Seder. It's an edgy time for us because of the deep connection with communion, so our Seder is an attempt to eat God. So communion didn't start that, and I don't know how people feel about it if I say you got it from us, but I hope that's okay. And so the first part of this talk, I want to talk about eating God, because some people, you see, I'm eating God, and they think you're a cannibal or something, right? I mean, that's a strange idea. But what we say is we say there's an eating for life and an eating for death. And the eating for death is called tuma, which is the death force. And our Seder is specifically called eating for life. And so there's some other people in my age range. Fortunately and unfortunately, we all know that with the present massive numbers of people with diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and massive number of eating disorders that have come upon gluten, allergies, et cetera, that it's literally plausible to eat for death. And our eating is killing us in this country right as we speak, right? And I'm fighting it every day. So it's really concrete what it means to eat for life, but we know if you eat when you're tired or distracted or watching TV, you have a problem. It'll affect your health. And so eating for life is and so 3,000 years ago, Abraham started the Jewish religion at the Tower of Babel, and most of the stories I tell are either in the Torah or they're in the oral Torah. So we have two Torahs, which is written, which is the form, and so probably a lot of you know our written Torahs are very accurate. That there's Torahs that are thousands of years old, and there's only maybe these are printed without even one typo mistake of the scribe. It's very, very accurate, going all the way back to the Dead Sea Scrolls and so forth. And that's the form. But there's a paradox, and that's what I teach. I'll try to explain that a little bit. Attention with the oral Torah, and I'm here to represent the oral Torah. I'm here connected to all of my teachers going back 3,000 years to Abraham. And we have this tradition that rabbis are, the first man I ever saw, I grew up in a standard American household. My father worked, and if he was lucky, he would boil water, right? And there's some men who are a little quirky, they cook. But when I was growing up, no, men didn't cook, women cooked. And so one of my first introductions to an Orthodox rabbi was my teacher, Rabbi Shlomi Tversky, came to me. I came to his house, and he was standing there in an apron cooking livers. Well, just like the Paschal lamb, we have to roast livers. We have to have a special utensils because livers are soaked with blood. And that's, we have to drain the blood out, so we have to roast them over a special barbecue so that the blood will drip down. And my teacher cooked all the time. And so that was the temple and the tabernacle in the desert was a big kitchen, because the strand that connects us through the millennia is this eating for life. Eating is the center of our Judaism. Not everybody knows that. The highest part of our prayers in the morning is when we eat breakfast, because you're taking a finite thing that has an infinite spark in it of the infinite source of life, and you're connecting the finite and the infinite. So when you eat your first bagel in the morning, if you eat bagels, and this is called eating for life. If you could taste if you could be focused enough and not distracted and not, so one of the biggest sins in Torah is to eat standing up. because you got to sit down and focus. And our main prayer that Abraham wrote is, we say a very brief grace before meals, but we say a long prayer after the meal that Abraham wrote. So Abraham was there at the Tower of Babel, and we have this oral tradition that comes down from all the way from the first human beings, Adam and Eve, and it's a companion to the Torah, and it's takes the form, it's called Midrash, or Torah Sheba'al Peh, and it's vibrant, it's alive, it's moving all the time. And that's what I do. I'm an embodiment of the oral Torah, and that's what brings me here today. So let me take a breath. Any questions so far? I'm praying, I pray every day for good students and good questions. So I made a very strong prayer this morning. And we say a prayer every morning before we can study at all. And we say, please, God, make the Torah confusing in my mind. Crazy, huh? Crazy Jews, yeah. No, no, that's, what's the oil stuff? Huh? WD-40 or what? What's that oil stuff you spray into? Yeah, but it's hard to get access into most people's craniums, But we are, obviously, unfortunately, part of this food thing, they think, and I believe it, my sister has Alzheimer's, and we also have this whole plague of Alzheimer's from the sugar, and heart problems. And I'm fighting all of them every day. I'm in my 70th year, so this eating for life is not a theory for me. It's a very real thing. And one study they did in Israel is that these people like myself and what I try to stimulate, who study every day, it's a great way to fight off Alzheimer's and dementia. And that's not theoretical, it's real. Yeah.
My question is that since the Passover was so very important in our culture today,
Yes.
is that when I read the Torah and read the scriptures, I find it very rarely celebrated. And what I find the constant theme is, remember the Exodus, remember the Exodus, remember what we did. But I could probably go through the scriptures and see it maybe celebrated not more than 10 times, not even that. So I'm curious about that. Is that kept in the oral tradition instead of in the written?
Good question. I'm going to give you 500 gold stars for that. Well, yeah, I mean, it's liberating. First of all, there's no clergyman there. We have it in our homes. And everybody gets my father had a Haggadah, and it said, skip to page 40, so he could do the whole thing in 5 minutes, And I'm still a little tired. We did 2 Seders Friday and Saturday night, and we started at 8 and we ended at 3 in the morning. So, can we handle 2 hours here, John? Anyway, it's very tiring. And we have another holiday, Shavuos, which is coming up, which is, we count the Omer, which is like counting for Lent. Do Episcopalians count for Lent? Yeah. Thank God. We count every day. Today is day 3. We're counting because it took 50 days to walk from where to where. Let's get the Bible scholars here. What? From Egypt, specifically where in Egypt? Goshen. You know what Goshen means? It means the place of coming together. You know why they were in slavery in the oral tradition? Because the sons of Jacob, treated each other like slaves. So the idea was embodied in the cherubs. Anybody know about the cherubs? Where are the cherubs? On the sides of the ark. Very good. And what are they made out of? Gold. That's a violation of the second commandment. How could that be? How could God tell us to violate the second commandment? Don't have any idols. And we're really strict about it. When I go to Snowmass, they take out all the crucifixes from where I stay and from the meeting hall, everything, because we can't do that. So we're very strict about it, as are the Muslims. How could there be two golden idols? And where were they? On the ark. And the ark was in what part of the tabernacle, do you know? The Holy of Holies. Wow. And God broke the rule? Right after he gave it, right? Right after he gave it at Mount Sinai. That's incredible. But it's so important. The golden cherubs in the oral tradition they moved. And when people were cooperating, they were facing each other. And when people were hating each other or not cooperating and not close to God, they were back to back. So that becomes the primary metaphor of the Torah. That God smiles on us. That's why I say God and Abraham is just having a little conversation here. I'm big on conversations, and there were a lot of conversations that didn't happen over the years, like about this blood stuff. And conversations are really important. And they're important for this dialogue that has happened in this country. And I'm going to read something from Pope Francis because he changed 2,000 years of history in December, this last December. And that was, for people who know the history, it's like incredible what that statement that was issued from the Pope's commission was just an incredible statement. So I just wanted to read a little bit of it. But so we have two forces here, which is the sibling rivalry in the book of Genesis, which is a focal point of how brothers can try to kill each other, starting with Cain and Abel and going down to the attempted murder of Joseph. And that's the back-to-back, and then the front-to-front, sometimes they're embracing. The cherubs are embracing. We call them kruvim in Hebrew. And sometimes, so we say, the paradox of the Torah is it's as important to know when to break rules as it is when to keep them. And that's an extremely important paradox. Yes?
Are the cherubs that are on the ark the same or symbolic of the same as the ones that are not in the
That's a great question. They are not the same, and the ones guarding the tree of life, they're not gold statues. But what they have in common, the ones guarding the tree of life have a sword of mortality that turns everything upside down, which they guard the tree of life. So we call the Torah the Eitz HaChaim, the tree of life. And like I say, like eating for life, we don't say choose to be good. We say choose life. And to choose life, sometimes you have to break the rules. And so that's awfully important throughout the Torah. An example of that would be in the book of Esther. Who were the heroes of the book of Esther? Boy, I'm glad to have people who have read the Bible here. Who are the heroes of the book of Esther? Yes? Mordecai and Esther. And Esther's name means I will hide. And Esther, unbeknownst to you, in the oral tradition, Esther was married to Mordecai. And so when she went into Ahasuerus, she was breaking the holiest rule. She was leaving her husband and going with this drunk guy who wasn't even Jewish, which is, this is a problem. Because our whole thing is, Jews are a mystery to themselves, I'm sitting here doing this Seder, and we've been doing this Seder for 3,000 years, and I can't understand how we did it. I have no idea. Because every day I meet young people who want to marry somebody, who's Christian, because that's young people. That's mostly who they meet, And we let's see, where's Charlotte? Do we have our handouts? Yes. Oh, good, unbelievable. You get gold stars too. Thank you so much. So pass these around. And I have.
Do you need one?
So the first law, anybody know what the first law of the Torah is in the Bible? The Old Testament. What's the first law that God gave us in Egypt? We were in Egypt, we were slaves, and we got the first law. Uh-oh. Yeah, No? It was the new moon. In Hebrew, it's HaChodesh Hazeh Yelachem. We had to switch from a sun paradigm to a moon paradigm. So, the first part of the first sheet that you see here, Jewish identity and specificity, is we are moon people, and we're mezuzah people, and we're sheep people. So we know about sheep, and the Egyptians were cattle people and farmers. They hated sheep people because anybody know why? Where was barbed wire invented? Right here. How come? To keep the sheep out of the cattle grazing areas. So we had the range wars here, and everybody know that? Nobody knew? Yes, you might learn something about Colorado history. We're old natives. We've been. My grandfather came here from the Ukraine in 1900 and climbed Pikes Peak. It was the first thing he did. Never saw a mountain before the road was up there. So we do a lot of mountain stuff, and we helped. That's how I first came to Snowmass Monastery, because I helped start the Colorado Outward Bound School up there, and we've been walking around the mountains for a long time. But barbed wire was invented here to keep the sheep out. So Abraham, and again in the oral tradition, muzzled his sheep. And Cain said to Abel, "Get your sheep off my grass, off my property. I own the world." And that was the prelude to the first murder. So that's really important. So we're sheep people. There's a lot of aspects of what that means, And this is the month we do the Seder, because this is the month of the Zodiac, which is what? Anybody know what the Zodiac? What? Aries, the sheep, the ram. Right? So all this stuff should stir up a lot of mysterious questions, What does it mean to be a sheep person? But we always lived in the most powerful sun cultures, America, for starters. This is the melting pot. And we've lost millions of Jews to melting here in America. But somehow it keeps going. And we spend, 8 hours in the middle of the night at a Seder for 3,000 years. Unbelievable. How did we do it? I don't know. Because I see, like I say, young people come to me every day and say, why can't I marry Susie, and it's not PC, to be specific, and you should be able to marry anybody you want. And so it's hard. We have maintained an island culture that's very, very different for all those millennia. And I have no idea how we did it, except our connection to Hashem. And but I like mysteries, and that's the biggest mystery I can tell you. So I wanted to start with this piece on, what is a Jew? What do you see when you look at a Jew? And I ask my students every day, what did you see today that made you want to be Jewish? There's a lot of reasons not to be, like everything from ISIS to Hamas to anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism is one of the most enduring philosophies in the history of man. It's been pervasive for thousands of years. I guess it was to keep us on our toes or something like that. I can't figure it out. It's a mystery. And that's why this deep connection over the communion, eating the matzah, the wine at the Seder. And I think in your handout, I hope, you have a picture of the Seder table. It's called the Seder plate. And this is this food Seder thing. But again, a lot of people don't know this, but it's all just to replicate eating like Abraham ate. So back to the Tower of Babel. Why did they build the Tower of Babel? Anybody know that? I hope it doesn't embarrass anybody that, to reach God? No, to fight with God. They shot arrows from the top of the tower. Why were they fighting with God? Because of the flood. They said, God hates us. So they built this huge, big tower, and when women would lay the bricks with their babies around, and if a baby would fall out off the tower, nobody would turn around. But if a brick fell, everybody would scream. And so everybody knows that they babbled after that, and the 70 languages, everybody started speaking a different language, whatever. But Abraham met Noah there in the oral tradition, right? But that's also really interesting. Everything about this is interesting to me, that in the Quran, there's a lot of these oral traditions, word for word, from the Talmud. But somehow, even though Jesus was educated in, at least according to the Talmud, and this is a big controversy, right? Anybody know what the Talmud is? That's our main book that contains the oral tradition. Anybody know what it is? Well, it's a big deal. It's a huge, big deal, the Talmud. Because in the year 1200, every Talmud in the world, 24,000 handwritten copies were burned in the Louvre in Paris. The biggest censorship in the history of the world. Why were the Christians so eager to burn it? How come? I mean, that was an amazing deal to get every single copy except one in the Vatican Library. How come? And it's still the most vilified book. If you Google it, you can see it's still a pretty dicey matter. but we study the Talmud every day, and it's our oil spritz, that keeps our brains going, and it's full of discussions and arguments between many people. They never give you the answers, though, and it's great. It's like riddle after riddle. And John is my token Catholic. So we'll stop for a short advertisement from what's it like to study the Talmud.
It's an incredible experience. The Rabbi would say, get your synapses fired, and it opens up the door for a lot of questions, a lot of reflection, and continued growth.
Uh-huh.
So it's tremendous.
So John, tell them why they burned all those.
In my humble estimation, it was based on our oral tradition, and not understanding the scriptures, and out of ignorance.
Well, also it was written in the first century. A lot of the Talmud was written in the first century, and it had a story of the life of Jesus, and that was not okay. So I have many old copies of the Talmud. They all have the censor stamp, because if I pretty much for most of European history, the censors came around once every couple of months and had to stamp every book in the synagogue, make sure there was nothing from the Talmud about. And so most of the published copies of the Talmud today, the Jews are still afraid to publish that story of Jesus that's in the Talmud. Still afraid. But we have one copy, it's called the Steinsaltz Gemara, and they sent a person at that time, it was in the early 60s, into the Vatican Library, who had a photographic memory, and he put it back in there. So, but most of the copies are still, all the censored pieces are still out of fear. So there's still a lot of fear, because it's dicey, I guess. I don't know what you think about it, but it's, what really happened there in the Passover plot, what really went on. So there's all kinds of books and conjectures about really what happened, but I'm open to any questions about the Passover plot, because, it's really interesting. But again, Jesus was educated in the oral tradition, but the Christianity never absorbed any of this oral, but the Quran did. Muhammad studied also with rabbis to write the Quran, and so the Quran has word for word a lot of oral traditions, and it's very interesting. Yes? I'm really not going to hear you, I don't think. Yes.
I'm wondering how or if the Jewish story of Jesus and his life is, or if it does, differ from the Christian version.
Well, guess what? What do you think? What's your best guess? Yeah, I tell you, you know what? The piece I put in here, it's called Salvation Stories. And it was like, let me tell you, I'm talking about the fear, and self-consciousness of this whole thing, It's a big deal. So when I asked the Snowmass Monastery to put away all the crucifixes, I didn't sleep a wink for the whole night. I was trembling in fear. I said, this Jew's going to ask the scions of Catholicism to put away the crucifixes? I mean, so I was really frightened. And today I cut out the part about that story, because I said, I don't need to cause trouble, it's still, you don't understand. I mean, the big publishing houses, the Talmud is studied by thousands and thousands of people. More people study the Talmud today than ever before in history. And that's amazing too. But they won't, most of the publishing houses will not print that story out of fear. I just want you to know that.
Is the story in common like Passover Chronicle?
No. I mean, I could talk about it if you're interested. I mean, people always want to know what was erased or censored, I mean, that's an interesting thing anyway. But it's, an alternative story, the amazing thing is the alternative story fits, as I put it here, and we'll read a little bit of this here. The mystery in the New Testament is in Matthew, right? It says the genealogy of Jesus, and it mentions women. Usually women aren't mentioned in the genealogy. Which women are mentioned there? Yes. Yes. Rahab. Yeah. Which is really, really interesting, And what? Bathsheba. Yeah. So she was whose wife? Yeah. And when you start digging into these stories in the oral tradition, I mean, it's amazing, what the story is. But Jews don't know it either, I mean, because first of all, they're full. All those stories are full of sex, and all kinds of difficult situations. And you have to ask the question: why is this the lineage? And so I wrote this piece called "Salvation Stories" to illustrate what. Because in all of them, people broke the rules, like we said about Esther. And they broke them often sexually. And so, first of all, I don't know how to put this in a polite way, but, a lot of good Jews and a lot of good Christians don't like to, anytime it's too sexy in the Bible, they just skip it. So the name of my class is Everything You Didn't Learn in Sunday School. Because the Tamar story is the center of the whole thing. Because she risks this being called a slut, because she changed her mourning clothes into the clothes of a prostitute. And she's the model. She is the mother of the messianic line, or the salvation story. So in the Torah, and then King David's mother her name is Nitzevet. That's in the Quran, but it's not in most Jews, even though it's in the Torah, the oral Torah. Most Jews don't know it. The Quran, she's very important. And then in Christianity, I don't think you even have that name, Nitzevet. But there are about 5 or 6 stories that are all about this messianic line, the messianic idea. We call it the messianic process, because the word Messiah, first of all, the most toxic ideas that we gave over to Christianity and Islam are Messiah and chosenness. So we always quote Tevye. He says, "Dear God, could you choose somebody else for a while?" So these are difficult ideas, and you know, when Ahmadinejad says, "Well, Israel's a one-bomb country," you know, he says we are willing to sacrifice 2 million people to bring the Mahdi, which is the Arabic word for Messiah. You know, we tremble because it's real stuff, you know, and it's not some theoretical thing. It's a real nuclear bomb, you know. So this has caused quite a ruckus in the world. The concepts of chosenness and Messiah and who are the real Jews, and our founding fathers wanted to make Hebrew the national language. How many people know that? How come? They were all fluent in Hebrew. Ezra Stiles, the first president of Yale, gave a weekly class in the Zohar, which is a Jewish book of Kabbalah, all in Hebrew, every week, when he founded Yale University. And my family's related to him through somebody who converted from his life. So the pilgrims came over, they knew Hebrew. They knew fluent Hebrew. Most people don't know that. History gets filtered all the time, let alone the first century, right? History gets filtered all the time. So our founding fathers, they knew the Bible well, and they knew it in Hebrew. And they wanted to make Hebrew that was a candidate to be the national language. That's unbelievable. Of America, not Israel. No, this is American history. The ones you didn't learn in 6th grade, you don't. It's the censored version. So we like that stuff. I don't want to. Does everybody want to take a break? Should we take a short break?